Greetings, friends. I'm Reverend Christie Hardwick, and I'm joining you live streaming from the First Unity Spiritual Campus in St. Petersburg, Florida. So wherever you are in the world this day, you are welcome here. I plan to spend the next 90 minutes with you, feeling your energy in cyberspace with me as I take us on a journey to getting proximate. People wonder what that means, but if you've heard Bryan Stevenson speak, who's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative in Alabama, then you'll understand that getting proximate means getting close to that which challenges us, that we might even be a little afraid of, but that really needs our witnessing and our action. He's a beautiful example of that, Harvard-trained lawyer who, instead of going to the very prestigious firms in the East Coast where he was, he told his parents, I'm going to Alabama and I'm going to help people get off of death row. Yes, he did that. He got proximate with that which really kept him awake at night. He knew that there were people who were incarcerated who didn't need to be there and were actually not supposed to be there. And instead of just feeling sad and sorry about it, he decided to get close to them where they were, where a great number of them were in prisons in Alabama. And due to his work, over the years, hundreds of people have been affected, and now thousands of people, not the prisoners themselves who were released who never should have been on death row, but all the families who these brothers and sometimes sisters and fathers and cousins and uncles released back into a life that they deserved to be in. So that's the getting proximate piece. So what I want to share with you is my story of getting proximate. Each of us have our stories in our life about things that challenge us, things that we face, and what we do to move through them. Every one of you out there has a hero's journey. It's just a matter of you telling the story. And it's not that we dwell on the things that were hurtful or challenging or difficult or scary. It's that we recognize that they are part of our experience. I think of it as the soil that I come from. That soil is full of all kinds of nutrients and positive experience, but it's also been with tears and with striving. And so as I turn that soil within me and I recognize some of the things that are in it, I have the power and the ability to plant seeds in it, knowing that my intention is to grow from those most positive experiences, even when the soil is mixed with some of the other. They can be transformed. So I began my journey as a child of 11 years old when I decided I was going to get an afro because Angela Davis had an afro. It was 1969. I was 10 years old. My sister took my then pressed and straightened hair that required no water, otherwise it would just come right back into an afro. And so we just went ahead and got it wet. And if you're in the black culture, you know that that was not okay. So when I came home, my mother had some words for me, and they were not kind. She herself had some feelings of racism that she had embodied, a lot like many of us in the LGBTQ community can sometimes embody homophobia before we are able to love ourselves and come out clearly. I even needed to come out black, if that makes any sense to you, right? Because of my family moved us out of black neighborhoods in San Francisco, California, into predominantly white neighborhoods in order to, from my mother's view, shield us from the black experience. So my very first experience of coming out black was a really interesting thing. I was a school board member in Fremont, California. It was 30,000 students, 32 schools. It was a big job. I was the first black elected official in that town in California. And one of the people I worked with was a wonderful pianist. And she said, there's this opportunity to perform for a group of people during Martin Luther King celebration. And I hadn't sung publicly, and I hadn't really come out as a singer or a person who was proud of the African American heritage that I had. So I got on the stage and I sang a song that Wanda sang so amazingly beautifully earlier this morning. But for the first time, I embodied that part of myself. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, help me stand. I've been tired, I've been weak, I've been worn through the storm, through the night. Lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. In singing that song in pre-COVID days to 1,000 people in a beautiful cathedral was my coming out and saying I'm ready to come home to myself as a black woman. So as I moved into the world, being myself as much as I knew how to do, I ran into different obstacles and different issues that we have sometimes. Even before this coming out, in high school, I had a friend whose family's religion didn't believe that people who were black were equal. And so she couldn't take me home to visit. And someone I was supposed to go to the prom with ended up canceling because he said he was too uncomfortable walking down the hall with me. So there's these little things and then bigger things that happened, throughout my life. And so many people, as you know, the history had such deep and terrifying things happen. But it all matters as part of our story. So in my little West Coast experience, I thought, in a bubble, away from everything that happened during the whole Civil War and the South and Confederate states and the Union states. I thought that I was isolated from it and I could just stay out of that area and therefore not have to face the history. That was actually coursing through my veins. The history that was so strong that once I went to the South, and I didn't intend to, but I was the president of a board of a nonprofit, and they decided to hold their meeting in Charleston, South Carolina. And that was back in the 90s. I had to go because I was supposed to speak. I walked into what was a former plantation home, I learned later, and I saw an apparition coming down the stairs, and it was a woman with a cloth on her head, and she was carrying a bucket and rags, and she walked down the stairs and started to mop the floor. And I was brought to my knees. All the people in the room and in the house didn't know what was going on. I was generally someone who was very in charge, very focused, and I had really lost my center. So the executive director came to me, whispered in my ear, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I'm not okay. I need to go outside for a bit because I needed to address a crowd of people." So I went outside, I went around the corner of the house, found a place where no one was, and I started to cry, and the tears came, and I thought, what is this? And I'm a writer, so I started to write down what was coming from my heart, and what was coming from my heart was I wanted to hear forgiveness for that, for the blood, sweat, and tears that were given by people without their choice in order to build the economy of the country. And so I wrote my own apology from the United States. Right then and there, I had a red pen, that's all I had, and I wrote it on the back of a piece of paper. And that helped me to breathe. But I didn't know until then how much was in me that was wounded, that was carrying that around. Here I was already, an executive in high tech, the president of a board of a nonprofit, and I was in so much pain from that image because I felt that it was part of my heritage. So when I had that happen, then I went back inside and I had pulled myself together with some help from my friends and delivered my address, and then I put that away. I said, okay, that just verifies for me I'm not going back there. There are ghosts, there are things that will haunt me. It's too hard, I said to myself. And then, wouldn't you know it, as I said earlier this morning, there was a person who sat next to me who said they never sat next to a black person before, and they were from South Carolina. And I thought, okay, another indication. I think I'm going to stay right where I am, because it seems to be that people have overcome a lot here in the Silicon Valley. That was my idea. And then fast forward, I'm an executive coach. I've left corporate America. I'm coaching leaders all over the country. And I always get a coach myself each year and spend a couple of days with someone to walk the talk. So if I say people, you're going to benefit from coaching, then I'm going to benefit from coaching myself. So I chose this woman. And it turned out, when I'm not paying attention about where she is and everything, that I needed to go back to, you guessed it, Charleston, South Carolina. And I did a 2-day retreat with her there. I was so nervous when I arrived and got off the plane. It had been 10 years, almost 15 actually, by the time that last time that I was in Charleston, South Carolina, when I said I'd never come back to the South. So I arrive at the airport, and what greeted me first was a memorial to those who were killed in the church. And I began to settle down, and I began to be aware that there might be more to the story. There might be something else for me to see here. So I had to go to those places, and it was actually in Charleston, South Carolina, where most of the enslaved people in the United States were brought in. The largest number was in that port. So I stood there at that port where there were still the hooks in the cement where the chains were connected to the people that were standing there on display. So I stood there, and I had to breathe that in. And the person who was coaching with me said, what are the ways that maybe you're enslaving yourself, and that's why you have not been willing to look at the history of your people? And that woke up something in me. I wasn't ready right then to face everything, but it woke up something. And the beauty of this is Spirit was the director. I had been all this time saying affirmative prayers. That's what we do in our teaching. We say affirmative prayers. Spirit, lead me and guide me. Show me the way. Let me be a light in the world. Let me be the greatest expression of you that I can be. Show me what is mine to do. These were prayers all the time. And you know what? They were answered. What I said earlier this morning was sometimes you are led, pushed, driven to the place you need to be, not necessarily the place you thought you wanted to go. I thought I never wanted to go there, but I needed to be there. So the work needed to be done, and that was the beginning of it. So something in me was changing. Then another invitation arrives just a year ago. And that invitation was from a company that was doing a civil rights program. And they wanted me to be on the program, to be part of the program, and to speak to the program. And it was going to be in Montgomery, Alabama, Selma, yes, Tuskegee. We were going to do the civil rights walk. Now you might ask yourself, she's sitting here in St. Petersburg, Florida, and how did that happen? For the last 10 years, my wife and I have been together 15. My wife has been saying, I'm getting a little cold here in Cape Cod in the winters. Maybe we could do something warm, like Florida, like Florida, like Florida. It's like, no, no, no. And that work that I did in South Carolina just a couple of years ago, actually made it possible for me to hear her request and begin to explore this part of the country. So you see, I was imprisoning myself. I was keeping myself in my little corners, the West Coast and the East Coast, and nothing below or in between, just to avoid things. So I was living small because of the fear. I was keeping myself imprisoned because of that. So this freed me up to consider the idea of what is here. So we came to Florida, and we started to see that there were other places than the few that I had seen in my past, or in pictures, or in videos, or what I'd heard about Florida. And we came to St. Pete, and we went to the farmer's market, and I saw this vibrancy and this group of people that were so inclusive, and there were black, white, Chicano, there were people who were Asian. I could see that there was this huge mix of people together. There was music playing, there was vibrancy, there was life, there was possibility. And I had shut out the idea of this ever being something for me. And then I walk into this place, First Unity Spiritual Campus. I searched around, I went to different spiritual centers, and I was out doing reconnaissance for our family. So I'd come home to my wife and I'd say, not yet, nope, not yet, nope, not yet. And then I came here and I said, I found the place. This is the place. It was inclusive, it was diverse, it was alive, it was vibrant, it was leading edge. So I came into this community not that long ago, and it welcomed me with completely open arms, and here I am with you today. So this invitation that came last year, it was an invitation from Spirit again to answer my prayer to have a fully open heart, to answer my prayer to stay out of the way of the divine circuits, and said, you will go on this journey. You will go on this civil rights journey. And it was something more than I could have possibly imagined. I'm going to take you through some of the experiences. And the first thing that I want to do is show you a clip from a newsreel where I was asked to be interviewed about my experience in Alabama. I am someone who has avoided the South my whole life. I'll just tell the truth. I'm in my 60th year, and I felt like it was time to go back to school. It was time to face history in a different way. And one of our speakers today, that was amazing. She said that you're on holy ground here. This is where it happened. This is where the civil rights movement grew and moved forward. So I decided to sign up for it and to come to this conference because I trusted Rhodes Scholar to be able to create an experience where I could safely learn and feel all the feelings I need to feel.
You didn't think you could feel safe here for all those years?
I did not.
Why did you avoid it?
I was afraid of the South. I mean, I felt some anger about what had happened, and I was afraid that it was continuing and that somehow I was safe in the Northern California, my little Silicon Valley, and everything was safe there. So I avoided dealing with my fear of this part of our own country. So I was keeping myself imprisoned from being able to go to places in my own country because I was afraid of what I heard and what I understood. So it was time. So this is a pilgrimage for me, a personal pilgrimage, and it's really an opportunity for me to grow, open my heart, and see that it's possible for me to travel anywhere in this country and to learn, and that my fear was only imprisoning me, and that my fear was keeping me from being able to meet you, meet others, go to the docents at the Tuskegee, meet the students, see where Rosa Parks was, see all the things about what Martin Luther King and the NAACP did, and SNCC, and all the organizations I read about, but now they're alive for me because I'm actually here at Tuskegee. I'm here seeing the airmen in their pictures and their actual planes. So it's different to just read about it. Mm-hmm. And the last time I read about it, honestly, was what? In college? You know, this is 40 years ago. I'm in my 60th year. So I'm now studying with an adult mind and heart as an activist and someone who cares about the world, and say, I need to heal my heart about this in order to be a force for peace in the world. Yeah. So I'm at this conference with another 249 people for all of our different reasons in order to really see it where it happened, get proximity, as Bryan Stevenson says, with it, and reframe my own narrative so that I can tell new stories. Yes, reframe my own narrative so I can tell a different story. So I went there with some trepidation, and I wanted to show you that because I'd never been on a news program before, and what people said to me was, usually the anchors don't give you that much time to speak. The woman I was speaking with who was there, she was mesmerized by the idea that someone could actually have been afraid to come to her city, to come to her state, because she lived there her whole life. So this was an exchange of information between us, two different kinds of experience that we had had in life. I was fascinated with what she knew. She was fascinated with what I knew. I spoke to her a little bit before the program, a little bit after. But this was what was happening in me. And the beauty of actually getting proximate, getting there myself, I could not avoid what I needed to face. So in Birmingham, in Selma, in all the places in Alabama where major historic things happened to African American people, I was actually physically there. So I went down to the river where in this case the ships carrying slaves were coming in. And you could walk from the place that people were unloaded as cargo, and you could walk from that place all the way to the place where the auctioning happened, which is still there. And you could walk past what are called the warehouse district, which used to warehouse people. And there's some placards. So as you're walking, you can feel yourself walking the walk. And you think about the idea that you were naked, barefoot, coming out of months of journey, having survived. And this was the beginning of me reframing the narrative. Because I got close to it, I thought to myself, this walk with the fresh air and the length of the walk and the people that I come from made this walk. How amazing and powerful they are that they got off that ship, even with all that they went through, and still moved forward, went on to whatever was facing them. And they did that again and again and again. So being there, it really mattered. We also got to meet people because you realize that Martin Luther King was taken down much too early. He'd be in his 90s now. And there were people younger than him who lived to see so many changes. And one of those people, as you know, was John Lewis. John Lewis was a major leader in the movement. If you see pictures of Martin Luther King Jr., you will often see John to his right or his left, marching, moving forward. He was the head of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And the students were the heart of that civil rights movement. And John, until he died just this last year, was a voice for this movement. And he didn't stop the work. So I think a lot of people say to me sometimes that, the problem with the Black Lives Matter movement is that there's not a Martin Luther King. There are thousands. There are probably millions. But I know that John Lewis and now Kamala Harris, Reverend Warnock, there are so many, myself, Wanda, everyone you see who comes from African American descent that's standing in their space, taking their equal space, is standing in the footsteps of Martin Luther King Jr. So John Lewis didn't just embrace the movement for Black lives. He embraced the movement for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer folk. He felt it was all the same. He did not want to see our Jewish brothers and sisters oppressed. He did not want to see our Latina people or Latino people oppressed. He recognized it was all the same movement. He knew what beloved community meant, and he worked for it to his dying day, literally. And his legacy lives on. Let's remember that he's from the state of Georgia. Let's know that he was watching when the historic election happened just a week ago. So being close to these things made all that real for me. Being so close, because right after leaving Alabama, we went right to Georgia, to Atlanta, to see the King Center, and to know that that was the home of King, but also the home of John Lewis and so many others. And we met with people who were on the march. We met with one of the youngest marchers, who's now more like my age. We met Ruby Bridges, who integrated that first school. These are people who are here today to tell the story, and that the story continues, and they continue the work of taking their place, taking their equal place. This next photograph that you'll see on your screen is my wife and I, who were on this journey together, and we are with a freedom rider. He's telling his story. He's telling us about what it was like to be on the bus. He's telling us that he was on the bus sitting next to John Lewis. Can I have that photograph? The freedom rider. So there we are, and he's speaking to us after he gave a speech to the overall body, just the Freedom Rider one. Jane and I are looking at him, and you notice that we have our hands on our heart, because what he was saying to us is how meaningful it is for him to have us come from where we live to come to where he lives, to get close and listen to the stories of the people who were the ones who rode those buses, who took on the fire, who took on whatever was necessary in order to move things forward. So getting proximate with things does make a difference. Hearing stories directly from people themselves really makes a difference. And not just for your own learning and understanding. It's for the other to be witnessed. What I noticed in all the people who were leading us on different parts of the journey was how important it was to them to tell people who were not from Alabama, who were not from the Deep South, what their experience really was. For it not to be relied on textbooks or rely on word of mouth or what we think we know, but to hear directly from people and in their livingness now and how they're living with that as part of their history. Are they still in the fight for equality? Are they still working to stand in their place? And yes, the answer is yes, they are. They are. The next photograph that you see was part of the journey, probably the most difficult for me. And that was when I was walking over the Edmond Pettis Bridge. The Edmond Pettis Bridge in Selma is so famous for what is called Bloody Sunday. You've probably watched movies about it. You've heard so much about it. When they marched and they were met on the other end with dogs and hoses and billy clubs and guns. And they were told to turn back. And if you remember from the storytelling, the first time they crossed over the bridge, they were heading towards the rise, and they could see what was facing them. And Dr. Martin Luther King went down on a knee, and everyone followed. And they prayed. And he discerned. And he decided on that particular day we were going to turn back. They went back. They got inside their hearts. They prayed. But then they went back on that bridge again. They got back on the bridge, and they had made the decision that they were going to cross the bridge because the bridge symbolized freedom. The bridge symbolized that I have the right to take my place. And sometimes I actually need to take my place by just moving forward. They brought no weapons. They brought only their faith and their fierce love. So as I walked over that bridge, I slowed down when I got to the peak. And in that picture, you can see my face. I was doing a lot of Facebook Lives during this journey. And one of the things that friends remarked was that, you looked like you were under a lot of distress. You looked like you were under a lot of distress. I was processing so much. Being in proximity with things, I was able to feel the feeling of coming to the rise in the bridge, and what do I see in front of me? So I could imagine what they faced, and yet they continued to walk. So when I did the walk, I had to pause at that moment to really fully take in what my brothers and sisters, black and white and brown, did on my behalf. And on your behalf. This is the other important thing. On this journey, I was with 249 people, not at the same time on the bridge because we broke up into groups, but 20% of us were African American. The rest people were not. So they were there with us just like they were there with Martin Luther King and John Lewis on the march, on the lunch counters, doing what needed to be done on behalf of all of us. Because if they were not able to be free. Those who are keeping them from being free are also not free. I imagined the police and the dogs on the other side. Not everyone necessarily wanted to be there. Maybe they didn't actually want to hurt someone for wanting to cross a bridge, but they were holding up an idea that said these people don't have the right, and if you give them the right, you're going to lose something of your own. You're going to lose power. That crossing of the bridge almost cost John Lewis's life, who lived until just this year. He was beaten and he was kicked with a boot, and he looked up into the face of the person. And that person never forgot that he looked up into his face. And years later, it was in the early 2000s, and it was on Oprah, John Lewis and the person who kicked him in the face with the boot sat together, and John Lewis said to him, "I forgive you and I love you. I know that you were better than that." Even in that moment, this is something that people often mistake, and the people who I met in Alabama helped remind me that the movement was fueled by love, not by fear, not by anger. Doesn't mean people weren't angry and not frustrated and didn't have a fierce rage some days and some moments, but that's not what drove the movement. The movement was driven by the love of everyone. If you keep me down and don't let me flourish, you cannot possibly flourish without me also. And as you don't recognize the beauty of me, you're not recognizing the beauty of this human race. So it was fueled by love. And as Reverend Kimberly said earlier this morning, reminding us of the quote from Martin Luther King, where he said that hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. They knew that. They knew that. So they walked across the bridge full of love and were met with hoses and dogs and clubs. And yet, they carried on. And there was so much more. What have you been unwilling to face? What have you been unwilling to walk toward that could change things? Is it a conversation? Is it a place? Is it a person? Is it an experience? Each of us has the opportunity to get close with, get proximate with something and make a difference. One of the other pieces that I had the beautiful privilege to do was to walk the steps of Rosa Parks. This is a picture of me standing next to, sitting with her in a statue form. And this was in front of the Rosa Parks Museum. And I sat there just thinking about when she was sitting there on that bus. She knew what she was doing. People like to tell the story that she was tired. She knew she was going to stand her ground by staying in her seat. And I actually stood with her, also a statue of her outside, because that was where she picked up the bus that day. And they memorialized that bus stop with a statue of Rosa Parks, because that was the day that she decided to be the flame in the movement that would shift everything. And as you know, it wasn't just Rosa Parks or John Lewis or Martin Luther King Jr. who made the bus boycott work. It was everyone, every person who needed to take that bus to their work from the places they lived, busing themselves into where the jobs were. They stopped riding the buses, took their money, shared it with each other or kept it, had people make carpools back in the day, rode bikes, walked, did whatever they needed to do. And they held on to that for a long time. That bus boycott was not a week. That bus boycott lasted to the tune of months. But ultimately, the message was heard. It wasn't violent. It was full of love, and it had self-love in it. I love myself enough and you enough to show you the magnificent beauty that I am and that I can sit where I need to sit. And you trying to keep me in my place is making you someone who's an oppressor, and that's not a role that allows you to be free either. So the bus boycott was successful. And we remember these things because Martin Luther King was the voice. He was the person who was out front leading. And again, I remind people when they say, well, there's no Martin Luther King today, there are many. So you just need to look around and pay attention to who's leading people to their own magnificence, who's leading Black people to know their equality, to know that they belong exactly where they are. And you will find them everywhere in this town as well. So when I got to get Proximate, I also had the beauty and the opportunity to go to the residence of Martin Luther King there when he lived in Birmingham in Alabama. So this is a picture of me standing in front of the residence. This was an amazing experience. You actually go into the house. You actually stand in the kitchen with the furniture that he and his wife and his children used. And I stood behind the chair that I had seen in a picture when he was writing some notes on that table. And this is the same kitchen where he himself said he had that crisis of faith for a moment and said, is this really mine to do? There were threats all around. People were saying, we think that you should not be on the planet. And they weren't saying it that nice. And he wondered, is this still mine to do? But the light came through him, and he moved on and continued on, jailed over and over again. The letters from the Birmingham jail. But this was the place that he lived. So even while he was leading some of these amazing, transformative marches, meetings that were changing people's minds, he also needed to live. He needed to take care of a family. He needed to be authentic in himself and continue to lead. So when we say to ourselves, what's mine to do? I have this, that, and the other, all kinds of responsibilities. All of the leaders of all the movements up until this moment, all mostly have other responsibilities. Very few people get to be full-time in the movement, but they find their way. And as Reverend Dr. Temple said earlier, it doesn't have to be that you lead a whole movement or you lead a whole march, but there's something that you can do to honor the legacy of making this a world that works for everyone. So what is that? What is yours to give? Where's the place that Spirit wants to lead you that maybe is not the place you wanted to go? Just take a deep breath and sit for a moment with me. We're going to sit in meditation for just a moment. I want you just to meditate on the words you've heard me say up to this point. Breathing in. Connecting with your heartbeat. Connecting with the cadence of your breath. breathing in, we know that there were challenges and sorrows, tears and tragedies, and they continue. But breathing in, we also know that for everything that has brought us to this moment, there has been strength and beauty and magnificence. Let us breathe in and imagine our own consciousness as beautiful dark soil. Knowing that within the soil there have been tears shed, there has been bloodshed, but knowing that soil with sunlight and water and air and nutrients of love, of open-heartedness, of peace, can be transformed into soil that can grow something healthy, strong, and beautiful. We honor all that's been given, and we honor all that's been given by giving our own best to each moment. Breathing in and breathing out. We take a moment of silence. Thank you. Thank you for taking that moment and taking that time. Sometimes when we hear stories, we need to let them sink in. We need to let them wash through us and see if there's a new understanding that can emerge. So I recommend, as you read stories and as you hear stories and you listen to ideas and concepts, that you let some time in silence be part of your practice. I want to introduce you to someone. We have been listening, and I have been talking, and you've been receiving, and I'm just trusting out there that there's something of use that you have found. And now I want you to meet a dear friend and colleague whose name is Masankho Kamsisi Banda. Masankho is a teacher, an artist, a dancer. He was actually given an award by the Dalai Lama for, it was called the Hero of Compassion Award, for his work done with youth and African American and indigenous communities throughout the world, bringing the concept of peace from the inside out, working on ourselves in order to bring peace to every situation. Masankho was here at First Unity last year this time. He was here for Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. He happened to be passing through, and I said, can you come by here? And he came by and gave us a beautiful workshop in his way. Now he is in Malawi, Africa, which is his home country. He commutes from there to the U.S. when that was possible. And during this time when we're not traveling, Masankho is coming to us, broadcast from his home in Malawi, Africa, to give us a short sense of the workshops that he's done all over the world for Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday celebration. I invite you to work with him, listen, repeat the chants, move with the drums, and let yourself embody what he says. Masankho Kamsisi Banda.
Greetings. It is 2021, and once again, here we are celebrating the life of the illustrious Martin Luther King. Every time I attend an event honoring Martin Luther King, I am surprised by the depth of what he shared and what he stood for. However, there are some quotes that I keep coming back to. Today I want to focus on two. The first one is from his 1993 I Have a Dream March on Washington. Martin Luther King said, "I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character." Based on this quote, I wrote a story about a boy who was not welcome because of the color of his skin. And at the end of the story, he sings this song. Ndakuona, ndakuona, ndakuona moni, ndakuona, ndakuona, ndakuona moni. I see you, I see you, I see you, and I say hello to you. But the power of this song is in what it means. Because the dance that goes with the song goes like this. Ndakuona, ndakuona, ndakuona moni. I see you with my eyes, but through my heart, and I stand before you, fellow human being. I see you with my eyes, through my heart, and I stand before you, fellow human being. And here's the thing. When we see each other with the heart, we only see the human being that is across from us. We do not see color. We do not see ethnicity. We do not see what the person is wearing. We do not see all of those outside indicators that skew our vision of each other. And as Martin Luther King said, the only way we will get to where we want to be in the world today is if we can see each other as human beings. So with me, do this dance. Ndakuona, ndakuona, ndakuona moni. I see you with my heart through my eyes. I see you with my heart through my eyes. I see you with my heart through my eyes, and I say hello to you, fellow human being. Ndakuona, ndakuona, ndakuona moni. Ndakuona, ndakuona, ndakuona moni. Ndakuona, ndakuona, ndakuona Let us always see each other with our hearts and not with our eyes. And let us remember that we are all human beings. Let us remember that Martin Luther King wanted us all to be judged only by the content of our character, but not the color of our skin. The second quote, and this is one which I haven't come across, is this one. We must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. We must walk on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. And this comes from the where do we go from here speech. The second song that I would like to share with you is the song that I call the Dance of Yes. In 2021, after having gone through what we went through in 2020 with the pandemic and social distancing and the Black Lives Matter after George Floyd's death, really asks us the question, are we willing to commit to a world and a future in which all of us are welcome at the table? Are we willing to commit to a world that Martin Luther King envisioned, where with courage and determination and strength, we all do whatever we can to create a different world? So I created the Dance of Yes to say, yes, I am a human being. Yes, I deserve to take up space without apology. And yes, my thoughts and my words matter. And to really say, we, the world, is willing to march forward and create a world that we all want. So the song goes like this. Inde, 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 inde. Inde is the word in Chichewa, in my language here in Malawi, for yes. And so you are saying, yes, I stand and I'm willing to march ahead into a world that we all want. And in the words of Martin Luther King, we are willing to walk ahead on in the days ahead with an audacious faith in the future. So, inde, 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 inde. Yes, 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 yes. Inde, 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 inde. Yes, yes, yes. I stand in my heart in the up above, the Father, heart down below, Mother Earth. Father Sky, Mother Earth. So you are claiming your place in the world, and you are claiming that you are willing to walk with audacious faith into the future that we all want. Inde, 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 I am human. I deserve to take up space. My thoughts and my words, they matter. So, as we celebrate today, and as we look back, so that we can go forward, we are being asked by Dr. Martin Luther King in these two quotations, two things. Let us see each other as human beings, and let us walk with audacious faith into the future that we all want. Let us walk with audacious faith into the future that we know is possible. Let us walk with audacious faith so that the George Floyds, the Breonna Thompsons, and all of those who have been victims of police violence, that their deaths cannot be in vain. Dr. Martin Luther King's words ring true today as much as they did 50 years ago when they were uttered. And if we are serious, then we need to walk audaciously with faith in the future that we want to see. Thank you for the invitation to to be a part of this video. My name is Masankho Banda, and I reside in Lilongwe, Malawi, and Oakland, California. Happy Martin Luther King Day.
Inde, 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 inde. What are we saying yes to? Thank you, Masankho. What do we say yes to in our lives? What are we willing to get close enough to in order to be part of its transformation? You may wonder what happened, from the time of when I was young until not going to the South and finally making it to the South and then going to the Civil Rights Trail and actually walking the trail, living in St. Petersburg, Florida. What does that mean? What it means is that new possibilities became open to me when I healed that part of myself that needed to heal. The part of myself that was afraid to be in the places where I thought I wouldn't be welcome. But we know how that works in mind. As you think, so it is. So when I was expecting not having a welcome, that was often what I saw. And it doesn't mean that I'm in charge of everyone's behavior, but it means that my meeting situations with love are more likely to result in a positive result than my meeting situations with fear. So I meet situations with love whenever and however I can. So here I am in St. Petersburg, and now it became possible because of the situation with COVID. I was missing my children. But you know where you have to go from Florida to get to California? You need to drive through the South. Another one of those things that I said, I will never do. I will never drive through the South. But I was so compelled by the love of my children, and we wanted to shelter in motion and be able to see them in a safe way, and so a plane just seemed out of the question. So we got a camper RV, and some of you followed us on Facebook, Jane and I, as we were taking this journey. But this whole journey became possible because of all the steps before it, because of all the other times I was willing to get close to something that I wasn't comfortable with, because I was willing to grow into a situation, grow out of my discomfort. So we got in the camper van. It was 24 feet, I believe, and we started to drive. And you need to drive through Alabama, Mississippi, North Carolina. There's, I'm sorry, that was the other way when we went up to Chicago, but we had to drive through quite a few states on the way to California. We ultimately, on the way back, did drive through those North Carolina to come back through to Florida because we stopped in Illinois. But on our way to California, there were all the southern states to drive through. Tennessee, Texas. I avoided them all. All the states that were listed as, the original Confederate states, I really avoided going through those. But we were going to drive just two of us in a camper van, and so we needed to have places to park and to sleep. We wanted to stay inside the camper van, but that was for the purposes of safety for, the pandemic, so that we would eat inside. We had our own kitchen, we had our own restroom, everything was contained within, so we didn't really have to interact with many people, except for we needed to drive to places to park the van. So I called ahead. The very first stop, I believe, was Biloxi, Mississippi. And we drove from Florida to Biloxi, Mississippi, a state I'd never been in before. And I did some reconnaissance. I called around to people who've been there, who've been around Mississippi, and said, is this a place that I should go? And what about this campground or that campground? I literally had in my mind still, after all this learning, after all those things, that maybe I'll show up at the wrong campground and some things might not be wonderful. So I called ahead, and I used some common sense and intelligence, and I told people who we were and that we were traveling and that I was black and my wife was white and we were two women and we were going to be coming and we wanted to be safe. And, sometimes people didn't respond to that in a way that felt good to me. They would not have anything to say, or they didn't return my call when I left that kind of a message. So those were indications. But I persevered, and I would call, and eventually I reached a place where the person heard everything I said, repeated what I said, and made us welcome. And so we went to that place and parked the van, and that happened, all the way through the States until we made it to California. But that travel would not have been possible without all the travel before. So the thing is, when you make the first decision to lean into something that you're uncomfortable with, that's beyond what you're currently doing, that's outside your comfort zone, you don't know what the possibilities are, where it's going to lead you. So I got to take that trip, of course, see our children, which was amazing and beautiful, but I had done something I thought I would never do, and now feel free to move throughout the country. Now that might seem like a really strange thing to people who've never considered not moving around the country and going different places. But if the narrative that you have is one that says you're not welcome here, and if you accept the narrative, then you live your life according to it. Now, I was being safe and thoughtful and making those phone calls ahead of time, and I do know that there are people who still would like to do me harm just because of what I look like. I'm aware of this. But I don't need to dwell in it and attract it through my fear and concern about it. So I went ahead and took the trip, and now I feel like we want to do other things. We want to see other places. And I never thought I would go to Alabama, but I will go back. I didn't know I would want to go to Georgia, but I will go back. And now I am free to explore history up close. And you know what? The part that I was most afraid of is what transformed me the most. I felt so many feelings when I walked those walks of ancestors, of people before me. So many feelings that one day I didn't feel like I could get up. And I actually called the Reverend Dr. Temple and another friend of mine who are very clear. So when you are not being clear, even if you're sometimes, someone who's usually very clear, then you reach out for help. So I reached out and said, I don't know what's happening, but my body is racked with pain. I don't think I can get out of bed and do this again. This was day 5 of 7 days I was going to be on this civil rights trail. But what I realized I was doing was healing. And any of you who've had wounds, anybody out there, there is a period of time when it's really uncomfortable and it really hurts. But it's healing. It's moving towards its equilibrium. It's returning to its new state of livingness. Something first gets cut, and then it closes over, and it sends all kinds of white blood cells, and it looks really messy and ugly. And then it scabs over, and it's really hard and crusty, and it hurts, and it pulls your skin. But all of that is part of the healing. So what I was feeling was the transformation on the inside. I was feeling the transformation. And one of the things that helped me to move through that was first accepting it, not resisting the feelings that I had, not resisting that I needed to rest for a day and feel all the feelings. Because, the thing that was happening the day after the day I rested was going to the memorial of people who had been lynched. I knew that my body had already absorbed more than it could do, so I rested. And then I was able to go to that monument. And I'll tell you this, when we drove up, and I saw that there was this monument to African American people who had been lynched all over the country on a rise in Montgomery, Alabama, that still to this day has on its law books some segregation laws. I knew that anything is possible. You need to sometimes see it. So that Bryan Stevenson from Harvard made his way to get Proximate with the inmates in Alabama. Now there is a monument to the people whose lives were taken that's on a rise. It's one of the highest points in Montgomery, Alabama. And I felt the strength and the pride of those who helped make that happen. And I began to go back over the stories that I heard, and I began to pick up the thread. And the thread was strength and magnificence and perseverance. So I was able to heal that part of the story that was true, that there was suffering, that there was blood, that there was sorrow, and that there were tears. But I was able to recognize that what came out of that was resilience and strength and power and beauty. And why do so many people sing the song, "And Still I Rise"? Yes, we rise up. We rise up, we rise, we continue, we flourish, we turn the soil of our own souls. We take our woundedness and we apply the current, present, now possibility, and we let it heal. We feel all the feelings and we let it heal, and we dance as Masankho showed us, and we sing, and we move on, and we move forward into a new day. For me, a new day wasn't possible until I faced what was before. I was dragging everything from before with me, so I had difficulty staying completely present with the new now. My acknowledgement of the past has led to so many beautiful discernments and freedoms. The freedom to move around the country, to go where I want to go. The freedom to have conversations that were very difficult before. Somehow I didn't know this whole thing was going to happen, where the movement for Black Lives would once again be on loudspeaker, but I was prepared. All of what happened prepared me. I could not have known what it was preparing me for. So when I was asked to get on Zoom calls with people who were in terrible pain and who were quivering with rage and fear from what happened to George Floyd, I was able to be present with that without having to process all my own wounds, while I was trying to be present for people to show them that there was light. So sometimes we have to go deep into what challenges us, get close to something that we need to break through, allow our own healing constantly and continually, so that we can be a vehicle, an open heart. My heart was a little closed off because these wounds were in the corners of it and taking up a lot of space. And we all have them. You have them too. In the yogic tradition, they call them samskara. These little vortexes of energy that are based on something that we perceived as a negative event, or something that was very hurtful or sorrowful, painful. And we store them away because we don't know what to do with the pain, and we don't process it. So in my case, those samskara about my ancestry needed to be healed by being proximate, being close to what happened, facing it, crying over it, and then revering what happened as a result of it. And that's allowed so much to happen. I'm now meeting people in St. Petersburg that can help me to find a way to make sure that my talents are utilized to lift the African American community here, and that I become part of the lifting, and I am lifted by it, and I know that I'll be led just like I was led to all of these things, to just the right situation. I recently met someone who knew someone that knew me and my work, and we got together, and I learned about an initiative here in St. Petersburg that's very exciting to me, a legacy center. I learned about that because I had that journey. So what is it that's in your future that you can't see ahead if you just do the work of the healing inside? Something else that was made possible when I kept myself from being part of the South or part of the history of the country. I also kept myself from some of my more distant relatives, because they lived in Missouri and they lived in other places, and they had a different narrative than I did. And so I would engage a little tiny bit, but I didn't want to know too much about all that. This journey allowed me to re-engage. And so when I was ready, Spirit presented it. There was an email that said, the Starr family, which is my grandmother's maiden name. I come from the Starr family. The Starr family is having some reunions on Sunday on Zoom. Why don't you connect in? So I came to that, and I started to be regular and get to know some of the people who come from the same lineage as me, no longer afraid to look at the lineage and hear the stories. And we had always thought of ourselves as Cherokee because one of our ancestors was born on a reservation. And so when we began to look into it, we found out that my great-grandfather, Samuel Starr, who lived a good life, was born in 1875, just 10 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, 11, and lived into the 50s, right before I was born. I was born in 1959. We learned that Samuel H. Starr was on what's called the Dawes Rolls, which is the rolls of the Cherokee Indian Nation. But he wasn't there for the reasons that we thought. He was there because his father was enslaved by the Cherokee. And he was what's called a Cherokee freedman. He was made free from within the nation. We didn't know that. It became something first, a great sorrow, to know that that was the way we had the relationship with the nation. We had to learn about that history. And then we learned that many African Americans who had that same lineage had engaged with the Cherokee Nation about citizenship. And so my family, the Starr family, from Samuel H. Starr and Sadie Starr, have applied for our citizenship in the nation because of that relationship. And there are hundreds of us who are applying now through the big family tree, and already 50 of my cousins have been given what's called their blue cards as official members of the Cherokee Nation. You never know what it is that you're going to be led to, what you'll be given when you're willing to open your heart. So this dialogue that I now have with my Starr family, the dialogue I have with people in St. Petersburg about how I can be a source of light, a source of lift, to help people see their magnificence here. We have problems in this town like everywhere across this country. There are gaps in terms of the poverty and the economic opportunity. There are south sides and north sides. There are more developed areas and less developed areas. There are check cashing stores on one side of town and none on the other. There's work to do right here. Wherever you are, there's work to do. And it's not work that we want to do that's because we're going to help them. It's work that we want to do because we want to live in a world that works for everyone. During this big time of protest and people waking up to the idea that this country was built on a history, not all of which we can be proud, I asked people to post a sign for me. I said, the sign I want you to post for me is, please, I want to live in a world where you feel safe and loved. I want to live in a world where you feel safe and loved. Not just for me, but for you. When you get close to something, it's not just for you, it is for you in your healing. You need to have that healing. But when you do it, you are touching and healing others. I walked into a space in a room not even knowing who I was going to affect, and I remember getting a note from someone saying, you have no idea what it meant to me that you were in that room and the way that you spoke. I was on a board, it was called the Women's Leadership Board for the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. It was for women leaders all over the world. There were more than 100 of us, but there were only a few of us, a handful, that were African American. And I was standing there being one of the people who was leading a strategic planning process, and there were some students way in the back of the room. And when I finished, they came up to me, and they were African American young women who were at school at the Kennedy School where I did not go. And they said, you have no idea what it meant to us that you were standing up there. It gave them a vision for something possible. You have no idea that where you go, where you get proximate, where you get close, where you show up, is going to change the life of another person. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but it can be a big presence. Don't worry about every little detail of what it is you're going to do to help this world realize its common humanity and to be more love. Be your greatest self. And to be your greatest self, be willing to let heal what needs to be healed inside of you. That's my invitation to you, my invitation to all of us, to get proximate, to get close within yourself and release anything that's in the way of your divine self. I love you all. Happy Martin Luther King Jr. birthday. And may this be the year where beloved community reigns and we are all glorious aspects of it. Thank you.
Keeps on lifting me, keep on lifting me higher.
There's the giving of love, and there's often the act of giving a love also through financial support.
You love your spiritual community, and you show it in a myriad of ways. One of the top ways to support your spiritual campus during the time when our doors are closed but our hearts are open, we continue our operations through your continued financial support and love offerings. And the easiest way to do that is using text to give, and we are forever grateful for your support.